I'd like to introduce Leslie Weiss. She's the Deputy Director of the National Conference on Soviet Jewry, and she is the chair of the U.S. Mission for the Preservation of America's Heritage Abroad, and she is Irene Weiss's daughter.
I'm pleased to be here this evening to introduce my mother to you. Irene Weiss arrived in the United States at the age of 16 in 1947. She's from a Hungarian-speaking part of Eastern Europe that's now part of Ukraine. Some years later, she married my father, Martin Weiss, in New York City, and they moved to Northern Virginia, had 3 children, and then my mother attended American University, where she received a BA in education. She worked for many years as an English as a second language teacher in Fairfax County schools, where many of the students were immigrants, like herself. Some of these students were refugees from Vietnam and Cambodia, and they became very attached to my mother because of her special understanding of what they had gone through. Now, what had she gone through? When my brothers and I were growing up, we knew at a young age that there was something different about our family history. I knew my father's parents because they lived in the United States, but where were my mother's parents? Her sisters and brothers. As we got older, my mother began to tell us about what happened to her, to them, and to the Jewish people. We also learned something of this history at our Passover Seders, held every year with the few surviving members. Our Seders were never just about the cruel slavery inflicted on the ancient Hebrews and the exodus from Egypt, but about the suffering and death of Jews of recent history, with our extended family as tragic participants in this story. My brothers and I have always felt a responsibility to tell this story. Our mother's sense of her responsibility as a witness to this history led her to speak in classrooms and synagogues throughout this area. As a volunteer at the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, she was the keynote speaker at this year's International Holocaust Remembrance Day for the Washington Diplomatic Corps. And she was recently interviewed about her wartime experience on the CBS Sunday Morning Show. Tonight, she will share some of that wartime experience with you. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm pleased to be introduced by Leslie. She has devoted her career to Holocaust awareness and combating anti-Semitism. I was witness to something that needs to be remembered, and that is what I would like to speak to you about this evening. I want to acknowledge the other survivors who are here this evening. Each one of them has a story that needs to be told. I appreciate the opportunity to tell you a little about what happened to me. By March 1944, most of the Jews of Europe had been murdered. The 500,000 Jews in Hungary, however, remained intact. At that time, I was living in a small town in Hungary with my parents, 5 siblings, and a large extended family. We were a religious family, and our lives revolved around the Jewish holidays. Life began to change for us in 1939, when Hungary joined the alliance with Germany and began to institute the Nuremberg laws against the Jews. Jews lost their businesses, their professions, their civil rights. By 1942, Jewish men were conscripted into the labor brigades and sent to the front lines. Many did not return. Jewish children were expelled from Hungarian schools and universities. Jews who lived there for generations had to prove their citizenship to prevent being deported. My father's lumber business was confiscated and given to a non-Jew. I could no longer go to school, and we had to wear the yellow Jewish star.
The local Hungarian Nazis were free to abuse and humiliate Jews. On the last day of Passover, 1944, the Germans announced that the Jews in my town had 24 hours to pack and assemble at a town hall. We had no idea what would happen to us. Even though it was Passover, my mother frantically began baking bread so that we would have food to take with us wherever we were going. The next morning, a delegation of the mayor, police chief, and my school principal knocked on our door. They demanded that we hand over our valuables. My father had to give them some things. We left our house, where my family had lived for 3 generations. We closed the gate behind us so that our dog wouldn't follow us. We each carried 1 suitcase. Along with 10 other Jewish families in our town, we were all taken to an abandoned brick factory that served as a ghetto some miles away. There we joined thousands of Jewish families from neighboring towns. My family of 8 grabbed some floor space inside the factory. We were kept there for almost a month in primitive, crowded conditions. Our bread supply from home was soon gone, and we depended on the soup ration. The men were frequently dragged out for questioning or beatings. The Germans also demanded our valuables. One day, there was an announcement. All girls under 16 must have their heads shaved or their fathers would be beaten. I ran to surrender my hair and to protect my father. My mother gave me a kerchief to cover my newly shortened head. I now looked like an Orthodox married woman. In the middle of May, a freight train with many boxcars arrived on the tracks alongside the brick factory. We were marched into the boxcars carrying our few belongings. No one told us our destination, but we feared it would be Poland. Flanked by guards, my family struggled to keep together. The 3 older children held on to the younger ones. Our parents carried our bundles. We all managed to get into the same boxcar, squashed with 80 to 100 people. For the sake of modesty, men moved to one side and women to the other side of the boxcar. A guard slammed the door shut and bolted it from the outside. Instantly it was dark. A small slit in the top corner allowed sunlight. Hours later, the train began to move. Inside, it was totally silent. Everybody was terrified. It was almost impossible to see in the darkness, and the sole source of air was a small slit in the corner. There was a bucket for the toilet in the middle of the car. Hours passed, a night, a day. The bucket filled up. Peering out of the slit, my father confirmed everyone's worst fear. The train was crossing into Poland. People were hungry and thirsty, but even small children, my very young brothers, knew not to ask for food or water. By now, we were expecting the train to stop somewhere in the forest where we would be met by a firing squad. Finally, the train stopped. We are at some kind of camp, my father announced. There are barracks here and prisoners in uniform. This must be a work camp. Relief flooded over us. The rumors had been wrong. We were not going to be shot in the forest of Poland. The doors opened, and air and light rushed in. "Raus, raus, out, out," they shouted. There were dogs, SS men with guns, prisoners in striped uniforms, more shouting, leave everything behind. My mother quickly unpacked extra clothing and told us to put on more layers. My head had already been covered with a kerchief, and I put on an oversized winter coat. In a daze, I jumped out of the boxcar down onto the platform. About 2,000 other people did the same. My family reached for each other, urgently trying to stay together in the swarm of people, the noise and the confusion. As soon as we were out of the train, Jewish prisoners wearing striped uniforms jumped into the cars and dumped out all our suitcases and possessions onto the platform. And then our possessions were piled into waiting trucks on the platform. A German guard parked men to one side, women and children to the other. In an instant, my father and 16-year-old brother were swallowed into a large column of men off to one side. I had no idea that I would never see them again. My mother, sisters, and younger brothers and I were in another enormous column of women and young children. A chimney was visible in the distance. Flames and smoke billowed from it. The column edged forward. Suddenly my family was at the front of the column. Blocking our way were a dozen armed German SS. One held a small stick. The SS motioned my sister Serena, who was 17, to the left. She joined other young women. At the same moment, the SS motioned my mother and two little brothers to the right, and they disappeared from view. Only my younger sister and I remained. A baton came down between us. My sister was sent in the direction of my mother. The German looked at me and hesitated for an instant, although I was only 13 and should have been selected with the children. My shaved head, kerchief, and coat made me look older. He motioned me towards the direction of the young adults and turned his attention to women and children lined up behind me. I hesitated and remained standing there, trying to see whether my younger sister had caught up to my mother. It was not possible for me to see what happened to her. I was horrified that she might be alone in the huge crowd. She was 12 years old. After the war, I learned that this very moment was captured in a picture taken by the SS, which is now part of the permanent exhibition in the Holocaust Museum. The picture is also in the journal at your table. The SS motioned for me to get going. Terrified, I ran in the direction of my older sister. "Why didn't you go with Mom?" she demanded. I told her how Edith, my younger sister, separated from me, and that she might not find our mother in the fast-moving crowd. I was distraught about her condition. Serena and I were herded into a bathhouse where we were shaved, processed, disinfected, and handed prison clothes. We were directed to barracks with about 200 women. We still didn't know where we were. We asked, "When are we going to see our families?" The women who had been there before us pointed to a chimney and said, "Do you see the smoke? There is your family." I thought, why would anybody say such things to us? We soon learned that they were telling us the truth. In a few days, by sheer luck, we discovered my mother's two sisters in the nearby barrack. They arrived a day earlier. Their devotion and help helped us protect and shield us in this very hostile, frightening place. After a few weeks, numbers were tattooed on our arms. This seemed like a good sign. We thought that this could mean that they were keeping track of our existence. We were sent to work near the crematorium at a storage and processing area where we sorted through mountains of belongings brought by the people arriving on the many transports from Hungary. Shoes, eyeglasses, toothbrushes, baby carriages, and every imaginable household item was dumped in this place to be sorted and sent to Germany. The clothes from the gas chambers was also dumped in this place to be processed. Every morning we were made to line up for counting and inspection. Each lineup was another selection to find the weak, the sick, and any children who had been missed before. I remember trying to stand on a rock so that I would seem taller and older than 13 years, and pinching my cheeks so I would look a little healthier. Because we worked and lived in barracks next to the gas chambers and crematoriums, we soon had first-hand knowledge of what had happened to our families. Day and night, older men, women, and young mothers with children en route to their deaths passed our barrack. We watched them enter the gate that led to the gas chambers. Sometimes they called out questions to us, but at that point, nothing could save them. The sounds were magnified when I worked the night shift. First, I would hear the hissing of a steam engine arriving at the platform, and then the whistle of the train. Within a half hour, hundreds of women, children, and elderly would pass by our barrack and disappear into the gas chambers. The people arriving at night saw the smoke and flames belching from the chimneys and the burning of bodies in open pits. It looked to them like they were being herded into an open fire. Their shrieks and prayers were soon followed by silence. Day and night, the transports kept coming. The Germans were losing the war, and yet they were rushing to finish the final solution. The 4 gas chambers and crematoriums operated day and night to keep up with the extermination of the largest number of Jews remaining in occupied Europe. Between May and June 1944, over 1,400 Jews were deported from Hungary to Auschwitz. At the height of the killing, over 6,000 Jews were killed every 24 hours. We watched this with horror, disbelief, and numbness. In the late fall of 1944, as the Russian front approached, the Germans blew up the killing facilities. In January 45, we were forced on a death march to prevent us from being liberated. Over 58,000 Auschwitz prisoners were forced to march hundreds of miles in January winter towards Germany. This was another way to diminish our numbers. Anyone who fell from exhaustion or sat down to rest was shot. We ended up in a camp deep in Germany, where by this time my sister, my aunt, and I were sick and emaciated. Here the selection still continued. One of my aunts was ill with typhoid and was selected and taken away in a truck to be killed. Next, my sister was selected for death. When I realized that we were about to be separated, I said, "I'm her sister." I was told, "You can go too." They put us with other selected women into a room to wait for a truck that would take us to a gas chamber. But perhaps because of the approaching Russian front and the resulting chaos, the truck never arrived. Soon after that, the guards fled, and with the gates of the camp now unguarded, the remaining survivors drifted out of the camp. After some time, we made our way to Prague and found a few relatives, all young adults under the age of 30, who had survived. From my immediate family of parents and 6 children, only Serena and I survived. All 13 of the children of my extended family were killed, as well as my grandparents. So this was scientifically planned genocide. Kill all the children and their childbearing mothers. Use up the young adults in slave labor. And eliminate the old and the sick. The goal of genocide was not only to kill the present generation, but to ensure that future generations are never born. When I was in Auschwitz, I thought that when the nightmare was over and the world discovered the unthinkable magnitude of what had happened, the shock would cause anti-Semitism to disappear. As we know, I was sadly mistaken. The survivors are getting older, and we are afraid that the story will be forgotten or even denied once we are no longer here to bear witness. I need you to continue to tell my story and the stories of the other survivors that you have met tonight after we are unable to tell it ourselves. Thank you very much.
is Meditation 1, performed by Kim Elkway, composed by Adam Runberg, a master's student here at Mason. It was originally performed the last Yom HaShoah that the JCRC had put together at the JCC of Northern Virginia. So this is the end of our evening. I want to thank everyone who helped make tonight happen. All of the students, student ambassadors, student leadership team, all of the people who helped sponsor different components of this event. And most of all of our honored guests who are here tonight and will be with us forever. So I would like to invite them all to come up for a photograph. Please, student ambassadors, take them. The space isn't much. And until we meet again, thank you all so much for coming.